Hello and welcome back to A Gentleman's Guide to Cosy Living. And if you are new here, hello, I am Ashley and this is a mini-series I'm producing on YouTube, diving into a lot of topics, more cozy living lifestyle. Into today's episode, we are going to be diving into why men read less than women, and also more importantly, why we need to change this. Sorry about that, I just had to switch locations as it's starting to get quite dull outside at the moment. But as I was saying, today's topic is why men need to get into reading more. And so my first question around this topic was, why do boys prefer non-fiction over fiction? And this is a sort of myth. It happens that boys do prefer non-fiction over fiction. And from doing a bit of research and reading a few literature pieces, as well as some scientific literature, that actually isn't the case. It's a very common belief that boys naturally prefer non-fiction over fiction. So they prefer to read to absorb more facts and information or action, and so they prefer utility over imagination. And this has been sort of a myth for quite a few decades now. And I think it stems more into societal structure and societal pressure that boys need to have this sort of basis of facts and action, and that they can't and shouldn't be able to read a lot of fiction books. But by doing some research, it actually shows that boys are being socially conditioned into reading non-fiction material rather than fiction material from a very young age. And so from reading a paper by Abdul Jabbar, and it's shown that boys often associate fiction, especially emotional or romantic novelties, to be something that is very feminine, and that only girls and women can have access or read that sort of material. And it's something that they've been told to avoid from a very young age. And so from this, they're avoiding sort of the emotional or romantic novelties, as they see it as, again, being quite feminine, and also to avoid it as it deems their masculinity. And so by labelling non-fiction scripture, this creates and affirms the traditional masculine identity, where men need to know the facts and they need to have no emotion when it comes to judgment or when it comes to dealing with any sort of situation, that emotions cannot be placed. And so there is this belief that limits young boys of being able to read by choice, and so it has led them to basically avoiding fiction, and we see that in a lot of men today. But there is a myth-busting moment here, and boys don't actually prefer non-fiction. They actually do often gravitate to fiction content at a young age, but they are steered away from these sorts of stories where they centre around emotions or inner life from a very young age, which leads on to my next question. Why do boys read less than girls in secondary school? And I picked secondary school as this is a time of new emotions being explored. It's a time of puberty, and from working in a primary school, I do see a lot of boys who read a lot of books, which is brilliant to see, but I do think in the educational system, it is very hard to encourage reading, essentially. And from another research paper by King et al., they pointed out something that was quite fascinating, and it was that girls have a reading success closely tied to emotional and parental support compared to boys. Everybody, there are obviously some boys who do have access to that, and there are some girls that don't have access to that, but this is just from one paper that I found quite interesting. From this, we can see that if there isn't an encouragement at home of reading, if children aren't encouraged to read, or if parents or guardians aren't reading to their children, then they do not have that interest of reading, and it can happen from a very young age where children find it difficult to comprehend. And so in families where emotions are openly shared, girls connect emotionally to the characters who they are reading about. But boys, on the other hand, they are less likely to receive or engage emotionally expressive communication. But that has, again, going back to myth busting, I should say, that is actually starting to change in a lot of new families today. And so with some boys, they might not see reading as a meaningful experience or as a rewarding one either, especially when it comes to reading school material. If it doesn't affect their lives or their interests, then they aren't essentially bothered about it, because it doesn't centre around their interests. It just centres around the fact that they have to read to be able to pass an assessment or an exam. And so if there isn't emotionally engaging stories where boys can relate to, then they just don't have an interest in it. But by the time of high school, girls often have a gravitational pull to reading more literature than boys do, according to this paper by King et al., which was published back in 2019, so a bit before the pandemic. And so because of this, it can create a performance anxiety of boys to read publicly in class. And I enjoyed reading as a teenager, and I started to get back into it now. However, if you have young boys and teenage boys who aren't confident with their reading ability, then they shouldn't be forced into reading publicly, as this can create a lot of anxiety for them. And also the social expectation that reading is a feminine thing to do. And so it's something that they are going to shy away from, especially as they develop and as they get older into adult life. So simply, boys aren't capable of reading at all. They are capable readers. It's just that they are less emotionally connected to the reading environment that they are in, whether that is in the primary school or secondary school or in their adult life. And also it depends on the material that they are reading. And so that leads on to sort of my next question, which is the point of this mini-series. It's about having this establishing leisureness for men and for other people as well. And it's not just, well, it is aimed for men in this series, but it's also aimed for anyone who can take any of the information that I'm hoping can resonate with you. What are the differences in leisure reading between boys and girls, or men and women? And so going back to Jabbar et al. 2022 paper, their systematic review outlined quite a few clear differences between boys and girls and men and women. And it's that girls and women tend to read for pleasure. And we are starting to see, by the way, a lot of male readers, a lot of male content creators. For example, one from the top of my head is Jack Edwards, who is known as the internet librarian, I think he calls himself. And so it's quite nice to see a lot of males on the social space where they are displaying more variety of books, and they are not focused on one particular genre. They are reading a lot of variety of books, so that's horror, thriller, romantic, a lot of different cultural books. So from watching a few videos on YouTube, I've actually started to explore, as you've seen, a lot of different authors from different cultures and different backgrounds, as that actually opens my horizon. And so this goes back to the paper of where boys often read when there's an explicit purpose, which is either for information or for achievement. And this then goes back to the high school question, that they are only reading because they have to read, not because they want to read. And that is something that I want to change, that boys should be encouraged to read. And at the end of this video, I will be providing a lot of tips and tricks of how I got back into reading as well. And so going on further with the paper, girls engage more in narrative texts, while boys lean towards action, sports, or non-fiction topics. Girls tend to develop stronger reading identities from an early age, and they see themselves as readers. And because of the stigma or gender norms or societal structure, boys don't see themselves as readers. But there is also a bit of a twist here. When boys are given autonomy to choose what they read, especially in a leisure context, their engagement actually increases dramatically. And I think it is important that they are exposed to a lot of variety of context and material, not just the books that they are being provided from school, because if they're constantly reading that same book more than 3 or 4 times, they're going to get bored of reading that particular book, and there's the possible interest of getting bored of reading in general. And so it's important to encourage from a young age of reading, and there is a lot of things out there. There is the writing challenge, from what I can remember. I can't remember the specific name of the challenge, but I'll probably put a picture here. And it's a challenge where children have to write a short story of, I think it's 500 words, and this is something that happens yearly. Comment down below what you do or what you have done or what you have seen in your community or in your country. Is there that same community engagement of local libraries encouraging children to read by having this sort of competition? When we see it in society today, a lot of people aren't reading in their own time now because of the amount of commitments that they have, whether that is work, whether that is voluntary, whether it is they are doing some sort of sport or other commitments that they just have to do. And I know I'm very fortunate to have what I have right now, and to be able to establish a routine where I can pick a time of day to read even just a few pages, because that to me is my achievement of reading those few pages. My second to last question is, why are boys reading more now, and how does this challenge the myth from the past several decades? And according to the British Educational Research Journal back in 2022, the gender gap of reading is slowly decreasing, and boys today, particularly those who have access to diverse, inclusive literature and in a digital format, they are showing a renewed interest in reading, and I think that is something that is very important. Reading isn't just having a standard book with a bunch of words in it. I think reading needs to be more accessible. And if you're someone, for example, who is blind, and you want that same experience as someone who can read, listening to an audiobook gives you that same experience. It's just in a different format. The same thing with comic books and manga. It is reading, you are still experiencing different emotions, different experiences, different situations. It's just that it's in a different format, and it's having this creative access for more people to be able to absorb that information, those experiences, and it has opened up more for younger people and younger children to have access to different means other than the standard form of reading a book. And so what's busting the myth here? Again, it's that access to relatable material. Boys are starting to read more books who have more of a male role model in them, and that is something that's also quite important, is to have these healthy male role models or healthy models in general when it comes to any sort of literature piece where they can feel that they can relate to. And I think that is something that a lot of people are looking for, is being able to relate to something which they can feel proud, or they can feel excited, or even sad, emotional. They have someone where they're like, oh, that is something that I can relate to because this has happened to me, or that's happened. And so from the research paper, they started to witness the beginning of a more balanced reading culture, which is very important, where men can find both value and joy in literature. That doesn't have to be the standard reading a generic book, which can be quite boring. This is sort of the last question that I had, which was, why do men stop reading? And this is sort of a big question, I think, to end it all, from a lot of papers that I've read. So for example, the 2019 paper by Van Bergen et al., which based their research on twin data. So they had twins for the research, and they'd noticed, as a bit of a side introduction for the paper, that Many boys enjoy reading as children, but the late adolescence or adulthood, that habit starts to drop off. Again, I can relate to that. Going through university, I had to read a lot of scientific literature, and so for me personally, being able to pick up a book, it was just a hard thing to do because I was just so to reading a lot of scientific literature. I just didn't have the time to read books, specifically fictional books, because I was just tired of reading in general. And I think that can be something that a lot of people can relate to. If they've had to read something for education, then they can't really read for pleasure. It depends really. I know a few friends who went to university, they were able to read for pleasure still, but not as frequent as they would before university as well. And so going back to the twin data, it showed that reading ability predicts how much children read, not the other way round. And if a child struggles early on, they are less likely to continue reading later in life. And so that's why it's important to have this access for children where consuming literature is not just from books, it is from a variety of different avenues, where if it's audiobooks, comics, manga, it's important to have that for them. How there is the combination with social pressures, there is a limited amount of leisure time that they have as adolescents or as adults, and that there are fewer reading models in the public eye, and so reading just quietly disappears, which is quite a sad thing. I'm trying not to be part of the whole booktube of reading hundreds and hundreds of books by the end of the year, because to me, if you are doing that, you aren't probably absorbing the information correctly. If you are chasing to read 100 books and you're just whizzing through books, you might not be able to get or understand the information in that book, and also are skipping on the experience of reading that book. You might be skipping the emotional story or some sort of lesson that is behind the story. Continuing with this, for men, reading has often competes with work and screens and the culture that doesn't always value introspection or quietude. It has actually become something that is an extra thing to do rather than an essential thing to do. But the beauty of reading is that it invites stillness, it invites reflection and empathy, and that is something that we could all use more now, especially in this time of need. I think it's important for a lot of men to read. There is a lot of emotion in them where they can have a better understanding of even their own emotions as well. And so I do have a few closing thoughts about this. So why should men read more? Well, for me, it's not just about literacy, it's about connection, and it can also have a further understanding of the society we live in. And I think it's important for not just men, but for everyone to read a lot of literature that is published from different countries and authors who come from different ethnic backgrounds, who come from different societal backgrounds, of having a further understanding and a widening visual context of the world that we are currently living. Being able to read or absorbing some sort of book in a different format, it can open creativeness, and it can also just help with that exploring of different frequencies of emotion and also intellectual intelligence as well. And ultimately, I think this also gets rid of the stigma or societal norm that it is unmanly to read and that it should only be accessed by women, which is, I think, completely wrong. And so reading fiction in particular lets us experience living outside our own world. It gives us access of new adventures and new stories, and it teaches us to really listen to the story and the lessons that we can learn from it, and that alone can change how we show up in our relationships. It can show up in our friendships, and for some of us in fatherhood, how we can be present emotionally and intellectually within our relationship groups Reading isn't one size fits all for everyone. If you can't read a book, listen to a book. So for me, I like to listen to an audiobook when I'm cleaning as part of my job in the school, or when I'm doing things around the house, I'll listen to an audiobook because I'm still consuming information and consuming new stories, but I'm also doing something else at the same time. If you are someone who prefers a hand-on approach, I do recommend a graphic novel or manga, as this is an illustrated notification which is not just aimed for children, it can be aimed for anyone. And it is essentially an art form, and it is definitely more digestible for busy minds. So another way I recommend this is if, for example, you are on the bus to work or commuting to work, or if you're in the gym on some sort of cardio machine, reading a short graphic novel can help you just get a bit of information in a short space amount of time. Again, same thing for an audiobook as well. But if you are someone who is truly busy and you can't find the time to listen to a very long audiobook or a long graphic novel, then there are a lot of short stories out there. There's a lot of small essays, there's a lot of poetry, and they all offer us something that is valuable, but it's just in a bite-sized proportion. If you are someone who wants to get back into reading, I think you should set realistic goals. I think one book a month is very doable. And for me personally, even though I'm busy, I have got a few books on the go. If you're a new beginner, I recommend picking up a book on your bookshelf that you have been wanting to read for a long time. Read that book, and even if you don't read that book in a month, do not be downhearted about it. Do not feel guilty or bad. You have started the process of reading a book, and that is an achievement in itself if you're wanting to get back into reading. Also, you could read a short story per week, so going on to your library, or if you can find a free book online, just reading a short story is even doable. And there are a lot of books out there, like physical copies of books, where they do have multiple short stories in them. So if you're a busy person, you can just quickly read a short story. That again is slowly easing yourself back into reading. And also I'd recommend mixing up the formats. So audiobooks, graphic novels, essays, fiction, non-fiction, they all count to reading. And like I said, reading makes you curious. So read something that you are curious about, whether that is about World War I, World War II, whether that is about historical moments that we have witnessed as the human race, whether that is reading different cultures' aspect and their view on society and how you can change and how you can adapt to having a more broader view of the society that we're living or in someone else's society. I'd also recommend building community, share books with friends, with family, with your work colleagues. Finally, debunking something. Reading doesn't actually make you more cultured. I think a lot of people have this aspect that, oh, you read, oh, so you are cultured. It's not necessarily that. It makes you more in touch, more aware, more grounded of who you are as an individual, and it just makes you more open thinking of the society that you're currently living. And so finally, yes, men should read more. This should not be a tick box exercise. This should be something that opens one for fulfillment and for curiosity and enjoyment. So thank you for watching this video. I know it has been a longer video to the Cosy Living diary series that I've been creating, but if you have reached this far, congratulations, you are part of the 1% group who have made it this far. And if you have, leave a comment down below of a book emoji, any recommendations to anyone who wants to get into reading that I've not mentioned, as well as a book you are currently reading, because I'll be interested in to read that book as well. And if you're new here and you fancy sticking around, please hit the subscribe button, as that will help me much to bring this new series that I've created to a further audience. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I shall see you in the next one.